So yesterday we talked about the Millerite history and we talked about Christ history, and we saw what parables looked like in those histories. And I wanted us to bring it to our time and just discuss a little bit more about the parables in our time and see the justification for our message. So I've been writing a list on the board, and I don't know if anybody else can think of anything else that's part of our message. So we know that in our time, the parables that we're looking at are not just in the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy, and that the whole Bible is a parable for us, but we have modern day parables for our time applicable to us. So at the time of Christ, he used the things of nature and their life experiences, the things that they were familiar with, to illustrate truth. And many of us might say we're not familiar with some of these things, but God is using history and information for us in our time to show us things about our age. So we had, yesterday, I think we started by saying Fatima, Acts 27, Pyrus. These are all the things that Sister Tess has, Elder Tess has opened up to us in the Midnight Cry message. And then we have World War I and World War II, and this is connected to the Third and Fourth Diadochi Wars, which is more the time of Pyrus. And then we have November 9th was opened up, the date. Information age, the fact that we're in an information warfare. I think we could put war there, actually. Connected to the elephants. And that traced the rise of the internet from 1989, or actually 1969, you could say. But 1989 onwards, we saw that rise of the ability that we've got to access information because of the internet, and how that's being abused and used by people. Then we had the counterfeit line, which was really about the papacy and the rise of Benedict and Francis. And these pens are running out, sorry. Let's put Francis. And then I've got the rise of the Christian right. So we do a line with Jerry Falwell and the moral majority to show the rise of the apostate Protestants and the thinking of the Christian right. And it's this conservative mindset which is behind Donald Trump. We've got November 9th connected to 2019 as well. Actually, we had November 9th there, but and then finally kind of ending in two streams of information now with conspiracy theories, race and gender. Can anybody think of anything else? Is anything missed off there? I know we're few in number this morning, so we have less people to contribute, but if anyone can think of anything else to put on here, let me know as we go along. So I wanted to ask you, what's the point of these lines? We started doing that yesterday because I think we have to have a clear understanding of why this information is being revealed to us and what's the purpose of it. What do we learn from it? And there's probably more than one answer, but we started that yesterday. So Sister Judith, what's Fatima telling us about? Why do we need that line? What's it dealing with? Okay, so it helps us to know how our line's going to unfold, the Fatima one. And you said it connects to Pyrus? I'll just tackle Fatima to start. What's Fatima? What's that line all about? About the three angels' messages. So it's a counterfeit, isn't it? It's not the true three angels' messages. It's a counterfeit, and we did that yesterday. It's a counterfeit three angels' messages, and it's connected to the papacy. Why do we need to see that? Do you think? I'm just saying, because in our line we also have three angels' messages. Why do we need to see someone else who's doing it? What does that show us? If we're the true church, what does this tell us about this one? So this is a false church that's in opposition to us. So we've got this. What else did that give us? What else did these three messages talk about when this supposed apparition of Mary, I say supposed because it's all satanic, appeared to these children and tells them there's these three angels of messages of like fear and judgment. And within that, what was the main thrust of that message for the Catholic Church? What was it telling them? That they have to deal with someone. Who do they have to deal with? Or something. Want to help me, Brother Oscar? Who do they have to deal with? They have to deal with Russia. So what this did was, I'll just put deal with Russia. They have to bring Russia under their dominion because Russia's a threat to them. And what that did was it brought Russia into focus of the movement, because of the counterfeit has got something to do with Russia. And we saw in our history that we have an increase of knowledge on the king of the south, which is Russia. So there's this connection with the counterfeit to us. So it's almost like a second testimony that we're correct, that there are 3 angels' messages, that Russia is involved in some way, shape or form. Well, that's what I'm getting from it. I don't know if anyone gets anything else from it. If you want to add anything, put your hand up. Because I think it's important when we approach these lines, we see a lot of information and we just say we need to regurgitate this information and show it to people. And I'm saying, does anyone want to stop and actually think, why do we have to show this information to people? Because if you don't have a clear understanding of why you're doing what you're doing, as a teacher, you can't impart that to anybody else. You're just going to give them facts. And the role of a teacher is not just to give facts. It's to give information that people can use. It gives them an understanding of an experience or how they're supposed to, what their function is. It's to give us more knowledge of connected to the practical. So we need to see the purpose of it and understand it. So what's Acts 27 all about then? Acts 27, Sister Esther, what's Acts 27 teaching us about? It's teaching us about Pyrus wars, not primarily in the lines itself. What are we saying that those lines are about? There's 2 ships. 2 ships, and what are they symbols of? We see a bad ship and a good ship, and they're symbols of, and they're going to end, but they're both, even the good ship ends in a shipwreck. So they're both going to end up getting destroyed. And what's that a symbol of? Who do we say is going to get destroyed? I think we did touch on it yesterday. No? Do you want to help us, Sister Jane? Behind there? What's Acts 27 about? Final, she says, it brings us into a final conclusion about who? About the USA and the SDA Church. So it's talking about 2 institutions. So we say institutions because we're distinguishing it from people. So we've got a line of the priests, which is about the priests, the line of the Levites, which is about the Levites, or the line of the 144,000, which is about the church as a whole, or the last generation. And we say this is in contrast to that. It's about 2 institutions. It's about the SDA Church and how at the Sunday law and the USA, that the Sunday law, they're destroyed. Don't we know that already as priests and Levites? Don't we know that's going to happen already, that the Sunday law, that these 2 institutions are going to be destroyed? So what's the point of this line? What do we gain from this? Why do we need to see that? Do you have any thoughts, Sister Caroline? So what you said is it helped us to solidify waymarks that had been lost. So we get, for instance, 1863 in that line. So it solidifies the whole line from 1798 right to Sunday law, which is a good point. I think it incorporates 1863 in there. And she said that we need this to get to shore. There's some people that need to come to shore. So what else did we get from it, Brother Oscar?
Elaborations on the history from 1798 to Sunday law and other histories can give. So we knew that as Sunday law, the structure SDA and USA will not proceed further on, but there are not that good models that could explain much better as Acts 27 will explain. So I think that it is more elaborations on how those two structures go into shipwreck.
Okay, so it's more elaborations on how those two structures go into shipwreck.
So it's like it's much more detailed.
Much more detailed. It solidifies the time period because we see the rise and fall of the 6th and 7th kingdom at the end of it as well. Anything else? Anyone wants to add to that? Brother Kuto.
Okay, according to me, if I read Acts 27, it gives me a good definition of what is faith. And so that faith is where you are starting at present, you are looking back and future. So when you go to Acts 27, you can trace these two institutions, their beginning, and it leads you until the end of this institution. So that is what I see in Acts 27. Another thing I see in Acts 27, I see how God's deal with the three groups: the priests, the Levites, and the priests.
Levites.
Sorry, the
So-
priests, the Levites, and Levites.
So, sorry, I've forgotten the first point you made. What's the first point you
I
made?
see that it gives me a good definition of what is faith.
I'll say it gives them a good definition of what is faith, that you need to see the past to understand the future. So it gives us like a second testimony of the lines as well, of the priests, Levites and Nethinims. Anything else? Brother Rogers.
I think we can remember from the time of being magazine, and the Jeff was making a case that there is a close of probation of the Sunday law. But using parables, we proved that that's not correct. So there was an argument for a very long time. The line that read the 9, 11, men and kind Sunday law. Whose line is that? So
Right.
this line finally showed that there is a close of probation of the Sunday law, not for individuals but for the institution.
So we had questions. So originally, in the Time of the End magazine, Elder Jeff was stating that the Sunday law is a close of probation, and that's what we believed for a long time. We believed that the two were one. And then when the lines of the priests, Levites and Nethinims were coming out, it was clear that the Sunday law was not a close of probation for any group. So we were wondering, wait a minute, which, because the Waymark of 2014 came up and we saw that that's Sunday law, and the close of probation is 2019 for the priests, for example. And we saw that the two were not together as a Waymark. So then we thought, well, there seems to be a close of probation at Sunday law. Who's it for? So this showed us that the close of probation at Sunday law is for those institutions. Now, why we need to see that, and I don't know if anyone's got any idea why we need to see that. Okay, so it helps us to understand there is a close of probation at Sunday law, and it's for the institutions. But when you ask practically, what does that mean? You think, well, we've got the close of probation for all the people groups. Why do we need to see it for the institution? And most of us knew that America was going to be destroyed at Sunday law anyway. That was a concept we already had for a long time. So why do we need to see that the Adventism closes at Sunday law? I suppose that's the last opportunity. So if you look at the Levites close of probation is Panium to Sunday law, and the binding off, sorry. And we're teaching that in that binding off, even though we mark the close of probation for the Levites at Panium, that still Levites can come in that history right up to the Sunday law. So that's the last point in time when a Levite can be saved. And so I suppose it gives a second testimony as well of what we've been saying all along, which is the Sunday law is too late for people to make a decision. This is what this message introduced into Adventism, was that we thought people could stand at the Sunday law and then they pass or fail the test, but it's too late for Adventists. By the time they get to Sunday law, it's practically all over. And so that's an important point when you're sharing with Adventism, that that we haven't got time to mess about, and it's too late by then. So that's good. Do we think that with both the ships, I think there's still work to be done, and I think Elder Tess says that herself, because every verse is not being detailed, and there's details in there that I think are important that we haven't actually bottomed out. And it's also understanding why there had to be two ships and why there's two lines, when it seems both lines to me deal more with the church perhaps than Adventism. I mean, Adventism rather than America. I don't know. There's elements of it I think that still need to be explored. Go on, Brother Wilson.
I think another thing that the line of Acts 27 showed us is that initially, through the lines of the priests, the Levites, and the Nethinims, we are saying that the journey of the two steps is from the Sunday law to the close of probation. But the line of Acts 27 showed us that the joining of the two sticks is not from the Sunday law to the close of probation because the Levites are being harvested from Biant.
Right, yeah, so we have the two sticks parable. Is everyone familiar with that? The two sticks that get joined are Judah and Israel, and they're found in Ezekiel 37. And we were teaching that the two sticks get joined from Sunday law to close of probation. Yeah, we said Sunday law to close of probation. And then we saw from that, so I'm going to say that's wrong, but that's what we said originally. Go on. And we saw from that what? That now the two sticks are being joined now, basically. Or at least in this period up to Sunday law.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so we saw that from the line of the Acts chapter number 27, I can't exactly remember the words, but
Okay.
we saw from, is it something to be overthrown and everything, the meaning of
Oh yeah, I think it's Cecilia and Pamphylia.
Yeah,
So one's overthrown and one's rising up.
yeah, so we saw the two sticks is not from the Sunday law to the close of probation, but what Acts 27 is going to show us that from Celia to from is it? I can't exactly
Cecilia
remember the
to
words,
Pamphylia?
but
Yeah, that's fine, those two.
this is the movement that's being, God is raising the new leadership as the same in the structure is going down, and externally, you know that United States of America is going down, the sixth kingdom of Bible prophecy is going down, and the seventh kingdom is rising up.
So what we saw is, they're going to be joined before that. So as the sixth kingdom is going down, and the seventh is rising up, we see that this kind of, the last group of, I guess the church is being joined there and lifted up, that they're coming together. So I think we've got some things from that. I still think there's more to do on why is it there's a ship of death, when Alexandria is a good ship and it's going to crash. What does one line give us that the other line doesn't? The details in there, because it seems like, we say the first one is, I shall abide in death. This is a symbol of both institutions, but the waymarks on there are not really institutional. They're to do with us. So we have Cyprus being fair. We have to be fair at the midnight cry. We have Sidon meaning tarrying. That's the experience of the movement, which is, it's very cleverly overlaid the ship story, which is institution. At the same time, you've got Paul and Aristarchus and Luke symbolizing the priests. And then you've got this number. Okay, the other thing we got from it was 273. So I'm glad nobody said that straight away. So we get these 273 souls, which links us then to Pyrus. So that's kind of like the stepping stone. That's where Elder Tess went from there. When she saw that number on the line in a certain point, it gave us a point in time to join to the line of Pyrus that opened up that history of Pyrus when she saw 273 BC. She linked that to a date. I don't know if that we could say that was the first time that's been done, where we see a number as a symbol and we link it to a year. And so I think that, just to give you an example, I think a couple of times I've heard her say that story isn't finished, I think. I think there's more in there to see. And even, for instance, like Julius, who is the centurion, who is over them, and he's a centurion, his name is Julius, and his function through there seems to protect Paul up to a certain point. At first he doesn't listen, and then he listens, and the shipwreck and everything, and then he puts him on his way. Several points Julius is mentioned, and I'm thinking, what is he a symbol of? Because he seems to be, on one level, he's a symbol of Rome. Or we could say America, maybe, because in that history, King of the North, the whole thing is like, what is he doing in there, and who is he in that story? And there's many verses in the chapter that they haven't gone into yet too. Okay, so what about Pyrus? We get to Pyrus. What does that teach us? What's the point of the line of Pyrus? I think we did say yesterday some of it. So I think somebody said King of the South. It teaches us more about the King of the South. We had Stalin and Putin, and we lined them up because we had an alpha and omega history of Pyrus. So there's two lines of Pyrus. You've got Macedonia and Italy, and they teach us different things, but we can parallel Stalin to Putin, which gives us more of a witness that Putin's role here at the end of the world. What else did Pyrus give us? We saw the battles. So we've got the battles of Ipsus, Heraclea, Asculum and Beneventum. So we can see those battles lining up in our history, but they also lined up with the battles of World War II. So that, I think, opened up World War II. There was also, in this history, we saw elephants. So we saw a method of warfare, a new method of warfare that enabled him to win. So we started to look in our time for a new method of warfare, and we saw that we're in an information age. So this kind of opened up World War II and information age. And so we saw World War II. What was the thing we pulled out of World War II yesterday? Sister Mercy, do you know what we did yesterday? World War II. What did World War II teach us about? It taught us about a series of battles I think we can parallel to Pyrus, but at the same time it was teaching us the involvement. So it teaches about King of the South and King of the North. Yeah. And who were they in that history? Who were the King of the South and King of the North in World War II? The Germans, yeah. So Hitler, basically. So basically Hitler, the Germans. And which one was that? King of the North or South? Yeah, so King of the North was Hitler in Germany. And then we saw who was in Russia? Who was the Stalin, yeah. And so we saw these agreements they made and then broke them, and we see that that parallels in our time with Putin and Trump. And who else was involved in this history? Who was involved with Hitler? Who's involved with Hitler in this story? That we can see the role of someone else coming in there. Okay, there was an alliance between Stalin and Hitler, yeah, that's good. But there was another power coming in here. Who else did the war teach us about? Who's working with Hitler or wanting to work with Hitler in this history? The Pope. So we see the role of the Pope. So we see this, and this book that's been written in our time, Hitler's Pope, which shows the role of the Catholicism in there in wanting to take over Europe, trying to use Hitler and it not working. And that relationship going sour, which parallels in our time to the Trump and John Paul situation. Did you want to add anything else? No, you're smiling? No? Anyone? No, okay. So that was to show us the role of the papacy in more detail about how the papacy works behind the scenes with these governments to try and get influence over people. What about the Third and Fourth Diadochi Wars? Connected to, I know it was mentioned yesterday, I think Brother Rogers mentioned it, how the rise of, how Seleucus at the end of these wars sets up the Babylonian Empire. So we see, again, the role of the papacy coming in at the end with that war. So we know that the papacy we're not finished with, that they're going to come to the forefront at the end of our line. November 9th. Oh, sorry, Brother Oscar.
Okay, the third and fourth Diadochi War, when we have to see them, they try and bring more update and highlights on the history of the Cold War, which was after World War II, most especially when you talk about the fourth Diadochi War. It gives us more highlights on the Cold War, which took place between Lysimachus and Pyrus to parallel what takes place between USA and then Russia.
So it gives us more information about the Cold War that took place after the Second World War between Lysimachus and Seleucus? Lysimachus and Pyrus, and now in our time between the USA and Russia, or USSR, and so that gives us more details about that. So it solidifies, it's a second testimony to that history in between and what they're doing there and how it escalates in our time. November 9th. Oh, Brother Wilson. Any more?
I think another thing that the line of Pyrus and the line of First World War II, concerning the King of the North, we saw that in the Alpha, the King of the North is the line of failure and the Omega is the line of success.
Okay, so we saw about lines of failure and lines of success from the line of Pyrus and the line of World War II, and how they parallel each other, but they're switched over, isn't it? So one's a line of failure, one's a line of success with the King of the South, King of the North, and we saw that parallel of those powers, which helps us to determine at the end who's going to win out of Trump and Putin. I think as well, when we have World War I, we also saw, what does World War I teach us that we don't get without, I don't know if anybody's, I know she's only recently done World War I, Brother Oscar?
World War One gives more elaboration in the history of 1989 to 2014, of which World War Two had not given.
Right, so World War One gives more history of 1989 to 2014, which we didn't get from World War Two.
So then if we combine World War One, which is the history from 1989 to 2014, plus World War Two, which is the history from 2014 up to Biant, also and the law, then we have a clear understanding of World War Three. So then it gives us World War triple application of World War One plus World War Two, it gives us World War Three.
And that's what I was going towards, World War Three, yeah. So what we see now is a triple application that World War One plus World War Two gives us an understanding of World War Three. And early in the movement, we used to teach this about the woes. So we said the first woe plus the second woe. So we took the characteristics of both. For instance, we saw the first woe, they just tormented the people, and the second woe, they killed. And we used that and how they attack and different things. And we got the characteristics of both to give us the third woe in our time. So we know this is a triple application that we make. So we say World War One plus World War Two is going to give us the information we need to understand World War Three. Okay, so November 9th, Sister Caroline, what is November 9th? What's November 9th connected to? How did that come about? Or anything? What do we learn from November 9th?
We learned November 9th from the previous war and
from previous wars
yeah,
and revolutions? Yeah.
yeah, and then it comes also from Daniel 11 that there is Biant and there is also Raphael. So the November 9th, what I learned out of it, there is a rise of a dictator and the fulfillment of prophecy as we have been learning.
Okay, so it shows the rise of a dictator with Napoleon. I think
The other November 9th of the previous wars.
okay, so we saw November 9th as a kind of symbol of revolutions, because we see it in the Russian Revolution, we see it in the French Revolution, we see this date being marked through history, and it's linked to a rise of a dictator. Anything else? So you mentioned Panium and Raphia. I mean, we make it the date for what we had as Raphia on the line, but it's not directly connected to Raphia. Was it the war Raphia? We don't get the date from that. Is that what you meant? We lined up November 9th with Raphia.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Brother Rogers? I think there was another way we got it as well. We got it from a 10-year. We saw a 10-year. No, that's 2019, sorry. Anything else about November 9th?
I think the primary reference to how we got to look at November 9th is the election of Donald Trump.
Okay, so we had the election of Donald Trump, which is November 9th. So let's let's just draw a line here. So the election of Donald Trump was November 9th. And then as Elder Tess began to look at that date through history, she saw its significance. It just seemed to keep popping up everywhere in connection with revolutions and rise of dictators and the election of Trump. So then we were linking Trump to this date, November 9th. And even Time magazine wrote the article about November 9th and highlighted how important it was to Hitler and linked him to Hitler. And so we saw that connection there. Anything else? Sorry, did you finish, Brother? Go on.
I think what then began to happen is the secular media began to identify that the date November 9th is important.
So secular media began to identify that the date is important. Yeah.
They took us back to 1938, 1918, and 1989.
So that took us back to 1938, 1980, 18, yeah, and 1989. So just give us a brief, is that Kristallnacht, 1838? Yeah, so the Night of Broken Glass, I was just going to say that, and I was thinking, is that November 9th or not? So November 9th was Kristallnacht, which is the Night of Broken Glass, which was a catalyst for the Second World War. This was where all the Jewish shops and businesses got raided, and they called it Kristallnacht because they broke lots of glass, and crystal means night of broken glass. Crystal is glass in German. And that actually catapulted that persecution of the Jews. I don't know if you want to say any more about that. And I think Elder Tabo's going to deal with that a bit later on. But that happened on November 9th. So we've got November 9th. So this was all part of the rise of Hitler and how it led to the Second World War. And this opened up the way for people to persecute Jews more easily. They looted their shops, they smashed their businesses, and it was that rise of persecution of them. I don't know if we mark it as being anything else, but maybe he'll go into that more today. So 1918 was that Stalin? Abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm. Okay, so this is abdication of Wilhelm. So this is broken glass. Which then led to, what's the significance of that? Do we know? Abdication of Wilhelm? The death of a dictator. So you've got the death of a dictator here, but you've also got the rise of a dictator in Napoleon. So it's all to do with dictator. But I suppose, would we say that made the way for Stalin to rise? I don't know. Oh, Wilhelm's German. Yeah, of course, sorry. It's not connected. Okay, so, yeah, there's a whole history there in Germany, isn't there, about the whole way that Hitler came to power as well. But yeah, primarily, let's just put dictator then. 1989, we see November 9th is the Berlin Wall coming down. And then we were making, so that's significant in our time. We know we've been teaching that for a long time about the Berlin Wall, and now we see it's November 9th and its connection. We just seem to see this November 9th thread everywhere. Anything else about November 9th?
I think one of the comments they were making is that when you look at all those November 9th, the most important was that of 1918 because it made the rest possible.
1918.
It made the rest of the November 9th possible. Without 1918, you don't have November 9th of 1938, you don't have November 9th of 1918.
Why? Sorry, so he's saying that we saw that 1918 was important because without this one, you wouldn't have this one and this one. So because it's all connected to...
It was the cause and these others are the effect.
So this is the cause, because he dies. So just walk us through that. That's the cause. He dies in Germany. Because this is all to do with Germany, isn't it? Because this is Germany, this is Germany. So this is the connection. Is Germany with all these three dates. Because this is under the time of Hitler. And then we see this is Berlin, is in Germany to connected to communism, although we see it's a symbol of the fall of the USSR, it's still connected to Germany. So go on.
So I think because of the mistakes of Kaiser Wilhelm on how he ran the government, that led to the rise of Adolf Hitler.
Right, so because of the mistakes of Wilhelm, that's what I meant to think, and I said Stalin, because of the mistakes that he'd made in the way he ran the government, and then his death, that led to the Hitler being able to rise to power, because the country's in such a mess, and Hitler's calling for that, re-establishment of Germany.
And then as Hitler rises and begins to rule, he leads us to the Cold War, which leads us to 1989. So they're all connected.
Okay, so then Hitler comes to rule, and that leads us to the Cold War, which is connected to 1989. So can we see that connection? And then when we look at this history of World War II with Germany and its role with the papacy is as King of the North there. This is a story about King of the North, I think you can say. And so we see that is, but then becomes a parable for our time for Trump. And then the connection is that Trump is elected on November 9th. And even secular press are now relating him to Hitler and to this history of Germany and how that came about, that Germany becomes this dictatorship with Hitler. So it's important for us to see the parallels between what was happening in Nazi Germany and what Trump is doing now. And even secular press is seeing those parallels. So I think that should make it clearer for us, the importance of that date. And then obviously elder test. Now we put it on a line, we mark it as raphia, and we see it's the close of probation for the priests. So it's the beginning of the binding off of all the groups, the priests, Levites, Nethinims, and 144,000. And I'm sure, as we know, on November 9th, and there were a few predictions were made that would happen, like the impeachment of Trump, and things that we're looking at now to try and solidify that date, because we see that it's progressive fulfillment of prophecy and that we need to look back. And as we look back, we're going to see more light as we go forward on the past events that will establish our faith. So I'm sure there's more to come out about that. But hopefully that's made it a bit clearer why it's important and how we got that. Then information age. This is all about what? Information age. Sister sitting next to Caroline. What does this teach us, the information age? What do we get from that line? Do you know that line where it starts with the rise of the internet? Don't know? No? Brother Stephen, do you want to ask that question? So the information age, what did that teach us? Why do we need to see that rise of the internet? The web, the development of the World Wide Web, that line. So this is, oh wait a minute, I have to put some space. I'm going to put internet and World Wide Web.
Pyrus for the entities that have been engaged in that war. So we come to our history, and we also are determined that the age in which you live determines the kind of weapons you use.
Okay, so hold that thought. So we saw from the history of Pyrus that the elephants were a new mode of warfare, and that's how he won the battles. And then we also saw that the age you're in determines what kind of weaponry they use. So we saw that with Babylon, Medo, Persia, Greece, Rome. They used the weaponry of those metals that are symbolized in that image. Carry on.
So when we come to our history right from the beginning, and 1989, we see the fall of the Soviet Union. We see what is really happening there is more or less old information. And so we know that because we are in an information age, the mode of prayer is going to be in terms of information. So we are going to look at the way information has been developing. Actually, we also looked at the number 10, and they were really giving us key remarks in the development of this age.
Okay, so hold that thought. So then we saw that 1989 was really about an information war, because in 1989 there was no physical engagement, there was no hot war, and we saw that it was primarily about information. And if anyone hasn't read that article, it's a Time magazine article, I think it's 1982, Holy Alliance, the Unholy Alliance. It's really amazing how it was an information war, and how I never conceptualized that till this started coming up about the information war, and I actually read the article, which I hadn't read before. And it really details how Poland was involved in this information war, how the papacy, how the Catholic Church went in there and helped with this information. And they flooded Poland with video machines, printed tracts to undermine the people's trust in the government, to say to the rising power of solidarity, the unions. They pushed that and they made it positive. So they did comic books for children. They did all sorts of things in that history to get the Polish people to rise up against the system and to join with the Solidarity Party. And the Catholic Church was heavily involved, and they'd put things on their notice board. They would hide people who were fighting the government in the priests' homes. They would help them. The Pope was in harmony with Ronald Reagan at that time. We know that from that meeting they had. And so it was an information war to undermine communism. And they used information to do that, to bring down that system. So then we saw that the information war, it was an information war from 1989, that we're in an information age.
Yes, and if you're to properly understand this war between the king of the north and the king of the south, then you need to understand how they are engaging. And so by tracking how this information is developing, how they are engaging with one another through this information.
So to understand how the king of the north and king of the south are engaging in our time, you have to understand that it's an information war and look at what they're doing on an information level. So then we've got the whole cyberspace, cyber strategy, all that kind of information to see who's winning and who isn't. And that, I don't know whether we put spheres of influence in there, but we began to see this whole proxy war idea and spheres of influence, how they want control over different countries. They're not fighting a hot war per se, but it doesn't look that obvious that Russia is not engaging on a hot war level with America, but they're in a warfare over spheres of influence and information. And then we saw the whole role of Cambridge Analytica coming in to influence the Trump elections. So we see that, and then the IRA, the Russia as well, influencing the elections to get Trump into power. And it's all about information and false information. And so we saw conspiracy theories, or understood that there's a lot of lies out there. And then anything else about information? Anybody want to add in? Go on.
How little information can see, you can begin to see that it actually, in a very unique way, begins to really quickly rise and develop since 1989. All these things being put in place, maybe a little before 1989, and during that history. And you can see even when you're dealing with the external events and Cambridge Analytica, how now this information is actually now being listed in this warfare and in the influencing of minds.
I think you can see how real it is and how this information is being used from 1989 to, as in a psychological way, to influence the populations to vote for someone. We can see how powerful it is that he got into the presidency. We know it's also involved with Brexit, and let's put Brexit down there, and how this is influencing world politics. So this opened up a political arm of our message, I suppose. When we see all this going on, we need to understand how the rise and fall of these governments. So it's very similar to Daniel 8, really, the rise and fall of kingdoms. We're seeing the rise and fall of governments, but we're seeing how information plays such a crucial role in that, and which should be expected, really, because our whole movement is all about a message. It's all about prophetic message, which is, we're saying, is the latter rain. And I don't think people conceptualized that before this prophecy movement was raised up, that we're in an information war, even in the church. This is, who's got the right message, who's got the truth. And it's just paralleling what's going on in the world. There's this warfare. So then we saw a line of the counterfeit, the papacy with Benedict and Francis. What does that teach us? Because we knew before that the papacy was the enemy, didn't we? So what is this teaching us? Anybody? Who's next to Stephen? Brother Moses, do you want to comment on that? Anybody? What does the counterfeit line teach us? Let's see if he's got an answer. I'll come. So it's teaching us the relationship between the external history and the internal. So the role of the papacy at the end of the world and how it's connected to our line. I think it shows that the conservative and the liberal element, which we've come to understand in our history, that the apostate Protestants, that this conservative mindset is actually negative, whereas I think most of us are conservative in our mindset, and we thought that was positive, and now we're seeing it's negative, and we see this battle, this civil war going on in the Vatican itself. So it's paralleling a civil war in our movement. In America, we just see that civil war everywhere between Benedict and Francis, and what that looks like. So you've got this whole conservative and liberal warfare. Brother Kuto, did you want to comment on that?
Also, it shows us two streams of information.
So it shows us two streams of information. You mean between Benedict and Francis? That there's two streams. So this is the conservative, traditional, old view model, and then Francis coming in trying to reform things and bring in liberation theology, and those two streams are at warfare with each other, which we also see with the rise of the Christian right. So what did that give us? Apart from, I think it did show us the conservative. It showed us how bad conservatism is. Go on.
The line of counterfeit also teaches us how Satan is preparing his
So this shows how Satan is preparing his church for the final work.
Or for concluding the great controversy.
Yep, for concluding the great controversy. And okay, and then rise of the Christian right. What did that teach us? Because we knew that apostate Protestants were going to do something with Sunday law at the end of the world. Sister Caroline?
And also we saw the aspect that previously they were counterfeiting, like it took 500 years, 100 years, but now there's a very thin line between the true and the counterfeit.
Okay, so we saw timing here. So if I put timing and then I put 500 years, 100 years, and now sort of like 1 year or even less, that they're catching up, the counterfeit is catching up with the true, and it's coming so close that it's paralleling. So we haven't got much time to work out what the enemy's doing. So the enemy's movements are becoming much more hard to read because they're so close to the truth. And we see that now at the end. We see that Francis, that this battle at the end now is going to be between liberals, between the movement and Francis, who look very similar now. We're saying similar things at this point about global warming, climate change, the rights of people, civil rights. So we can see how closely now the truth is paralleling error, or error is paralleling truth. That's a good point. Also, I suppose going back to November 9th, this brought time setting into the movement, and the whole argument about time setting as well, to establish that we can set time, that we can predict. All that was quite a battle in the movement as well. Rise of the Christian right. Sister Dorcas, do you want to say anything about that? What did that teach us? You know, do you know that line where we see the rise of Jerry Falwell and the moral majority, and the Christian right, what they're doing? What did that show us? Don't know. Sister Jackie, can you help? What did that show us? Rise of Christian right. Why do we need that? So it showed us the rise of the Christian right in America and their moral standards and their conservative mindset. And what else? Because we sort of saw, okay, so we're seeing the conservative mindset here as well with the Christian right, and this whole battle between, which on the surface looks good and we would agree with, and I think it opened our eyes to the fact that actually this isn't good. So we saw that it's negative, a lot of what they're saying, and originally we supported what they were saying. So for instance, 2015, when the gay marriage is passed by Obama, we're all saying, what did he do that for? He's the bad guy, because we're looking at it morally and we're not seeing this church-state relationship. So I think it is opening up the whole argument about church and state, because we're seeing the political aspect of the Christian right, how they now want to get involved in politics. This moral majority wants to influence the government. So it's church and state and politics that's coming out of this. And I think why we need to see that is because what are Adventists expecting, Sister Jackie? What are we expecting to see? A literal Sunday law. And now when we trace the rise of the Christian right, are they talking about Sunday? No. So now it's opening our eyes to the issues that the Christian right is talking about and seeing whether they're bad or good in that sense, to understand what our Sunday law time period looks like. Anything else about that? And the role they played in the election, which is politics, yeah, the role they played in the election of Trump. So let's put that down, election of Trump, which enables us to see that what Trump is doing is not good, because what they're doing is not good, and they've influenced Trump to get in, and we can see where that's heading, is heading to disaster because of the whole view of the Christian right in the way they treat people. We saw the connection between what the Christian right is saying today and what happened at the time of slavery with the North and South. So it's not just because they're using the Bible, we saw with the line of slavery. Actually, I suppose we put that with race and gender. We've got the slavery line, and the role of women, and this is showing us that both sides in the Civil War were using the Bible. So just because someone's using the Bible and they seem to be saying good things, we recognise that it's not necessarily the true stream of information, because both sides are using the Bible. So we need to be open to our enemy, to see the rise of the enemy here, as well as the same as with the Pope. It's a very similar concept, that we're getting to know more about how the enemy is working to discern what's true and what's false, because we need to know which side we're on with this information war. So then we get November 9th connected to 2019. What does 2019 teach us? And how did we got that? Does anyone know how we got 2019? How did we get the date 2019? Brother Kuto?
Okay, we use prophetic numbers.
So we use prophetic time spans. So we've got time spans. Let's put that, which is what Elder Tabo's teaching. So we get the numbers like 126, 151, 81, etc., 220. And they were taken back into history, and we saw that they were significant. And I think we're still understanding the role of those numbers now, and I think that's what Elder Tabo is exploring, that there's still information there that we're going to glean from those lines that we haven't understood so far. And even the first question I think was asked was, why are we doing that? Why are we putting those numbers specifically, when there's other prophetic numbers we don't use? Why those numbers? What do they signify? So for instance, we would have said 490 before, as that close of probation of the Jews. It marks the transition from the Jewish church to the Gentile church. It closes the probation on the Jewish church as an institution. Why do we use that number 490 there? And can we make that application there? There's questions about that, but we can see that there's some logic to it. And I think it's going to unfold as we go along. And to me, it feels like when we first came into this movement, we had reform lines, but we had lines like this. We had, say we had Moses, Christ, and Millerites, and we had two waymarks here, we had a waymark there, we had a waymark here, but there wasn't one for that one, there wasn't one for that one. So we had gaps. What's the second angel in the line of Moses? There were questions that we had, and we thought, okay, it seems to fit, but are we just trying to make this fit? But there's enough there. There's enough evidence there to say there's something in this, and we can stand upon it. But there's still lots of gaps. So it took a measure of faith to do that, and I think that's exactly the same with what's happening here. You may not understand everything why we do that. You can see there's some logic to it. You can see that it works, that it fits some of it. You may not be able to explain all of it, but I'm sure more light's coming on it. And with everything else that we're saying, it harmonizes so that we shouldn't be too put off when we can't answer all the questions. And I think that's important to see, because that's how he's worked every time new lights come. We've always had questions. We've always had opposition throw a statement at us, a quote. And for instance, like we start talking about 2520 and we get the longest and last time prophecy, and it's all about 2300 in the Great Controversy. And we haven't got a solid answer for it, but we can see there's enough evidence for the 2520 that the Millerites are teaching it. It's on the chart. It's endorsed by Miller, who's led by angels. There's enough to go on to say, okay, I can see this thing, but I don't know how to answer that question. And that's always what happens. So we get new light, we don't have all the evidence, and then as we go along, more evidence comes. And so I think not to be thrown out by that. So there's prophetic time spans. Brother Kuto, were you going to say something else? How we got 2019? There was more than one way. I think it was prophetic time spans and the number 10. So we saw the number 10. So there's a 10-year cycle going on. And although there weren't events for every 10-year cycle, we could see that it opened up sort of like we have 1979 before 1989. There's a 10-year preparation period there. And this number 10 kept coming up in cycles. And so she was marking that number 10, and it brought her Elder Tess to 2019. And we can see that number 10 is an important number because it talks about the remnant being symbolized by a tenth. So we can see there that the number 10 is connected to the remnant of the last day church, the last generation. And I think that's an important point to link it to see the importance of the number 10. Anything, Brother Rogers, you were going to say something.
So when I look at these things, sometimes I seek to understand what was her primary way for developing the way and what was the secondary arguments
So he's saying what I like to understand is the primary way for developing the waymark and what's the secondary way of developing the waymark. So the first thing that you came to, go on.
So I think the first and primary way she developed 2019 was through the 10-year time span.
So this was the primary way. The 10-year time spans was what opened up that waymark.
So she sees that if you go from, I think the beginning of the French Revolution in 1789, you go 10 years into the future up to 2019, at least every year that 10 years time span takes you to has some prophetic relevance attached to it.
So she saw, what did she see first? The French Revolution one.
From 1789.
So from 1789 to 1799, she saw that 10 years marked a specific point in the French Revolution and it was significant.
Then 79, 1809, now you go 10 forward.
And then she went 10 forward and she saw there was some significance to that date. So from 1799 you go to 18, that's actually 1809, yeah, 1809.
Something happened with the papacy in Europe.
Something happened with the papacy in Europe, yeah. So she began to see that there were significant events every 10 years.
So just like you say, in some of the years she couldn't identify specific important events, but at least the bulk of those years she could identify they were important prophetic the events that took place. So that showed to her that 2019 is an important year since the number 10 brings you to that year.
So she saw that there was enough evidence, even though she didn't have a date for every 10 years, she didn't have an event every 10 years. She saw there was enough prophetic evidence there to say that 2019 was important. Yeah.
And the other prophetic transfers just came in as secondary arguments to the report.
So this was the first argument, and then the prophetic time spans came into as a second witness to the fact that 2019 was important. Okay. Yeah, that's good. And so is that okay with 2019? And then we had two streams, conspiracy theories, race and gender. And so I guess this is, what do you want to say about that? It's connected, I'll put equality here, because we didn't actually put equality. So what did two streams teach us? Anybody? Brother? Yeah.
Okay, I want to talk about 2019.
Oh, you want to talk about 2019? Okay.
So what Brother Roger said is true. The first thing that was talking about is number 10. But there was problems or questions that arise in my mind at the time I watched the video.
So it's true that 10 years cycle was the way that 2019 was presented.
Like, you just see from the 10 taking to this year or 10 taking to this year. The question is, what did I stop in 2019, not taking 10 years again to 2020?
So the question he had in his mind was, what made us stop at 2019 and not go to 2029, for instance? How do we know 2019?
When I continue watching videos, I begin to recognize something, number 30. That's what bind that principle, bind that understanding.
So as he watched videos, he began to realize that it's the number 30 that binds things together.
So that's what I want.
Okay, so he saw the significance of the number 30. If originally it was connected to the binding off, wasn't it? We got this light on midnight to midnight cry, and we saw the number 30 in there, and we were marking it with different things, Islam, lots of things made the number 30 in there, this month period. And so he saw that from, you're talking about 1989 to 2019 is 30, and that's an important symbol. So that's kind of give you a second testimony to the fact that it's 2019, not 2029. So we have 1989 to 2019 being 30 years. And then, of course, in recent times, we've paralleled that to the life of Christ, and we see the significance of 9/11 being 12 years into it, and the significance of Christ when he was 12, and then 30 when he starts his ministry. So we marked that as the beginning of the start of the ministry for the priests with this 30 years. Is that fair? Finished? Yeah. Okay, so two streams. What does that teach us? What do the two streams teach us? Sister Snyder, anything? Or what did she say they were to begin with, or at least symbolized by the two streams in America?
So, I think she recognized that the work that the first time was
So this is another thing. She thinks Elder Tash recognises that there were two streams in the movement, that there was or in the church, that there was Elder Jeff, and you had to choose between Elder Jeff and the SDA church.
And then having developed the line of internal external.
And having developed that line of internal and external.
She started to look for two streams of information in the external line.
So she started to look for two streams of information in the external.
And then that led to the Republicans and the Democrats.
So that led to seeing Republicans and Democrats and that warfare there.
Yeah, and she had, I think, other evidences from how the election of Donald Trump was being carried out. I think also the issue of information warfare between the king of the north and the king of the south.
So this issue of the election and how it was carried out, and then the what is the last bit you said? The king of the north and king of the south, and how their interaction with this information war, how that was being portrayed in the press, I guess. So we had this whole thing about CNN and Fox News, as which we would have said were kind of both secular newspapers, and one being good and one being bad. But this idea of prophetically, so seeing prophetically the message of CNN and Fox News, so Fox supporting Trump and the evangelical right and the conservative stream, how bad it was, and that recognising that you need to choose which news sources you listen to, because we're getting more involved in politics now, and we're being exposed to news and told to watch it because we need to keep up with what's happening with Trump and Putin. But then we're being warned that there's two streams and we need to be careful which one we're listening to, and that CNN being anti-Trump and being on the right side prophetically made it a good stream, even though we wouldn't endorse everything they teach and everything they do because they're worldly. It's a worldly news stream. But that actually caused a shaking in the movement, that because of the political stand of people in America. So when that was presented at FFA, it caused a big shaking. And what we've seen is that really started to separate the two streams in the movement. So that understanding externally of two streams affected the movement to the point where Elder Jeff ends up rejecting the midnight cry, and obviously the battle at the end of 2019 to fall off the message in October. So this caused a shaking. This is an important point to recognise, because it's dividing the classes now, these two streams, and whose side people are on. And we're recognising that that's ploughing the Nethinims and it's influencing the Levites. So it's all connected to the views that they're holding on these subjects, the slavery and the role of women. So this gender race issue. Does anybody want to say anything more about equality? What does the equality message teach us? Why do we need to see that? Sister Sandra? Why do we need to see equality? This race and gender issues.
Okay, I think it is very much paramount in our time, because if we go back from the first Eden, that began where there was Eve and Adam, you realize that they were all equal. There was no limitations. They were all perfect and equal. And then if we are going back to the new Eden, then we must all be equal. And if we trace the progression line of equality.
So she's saying, sorry, just stop there a second. She's saying it's very important because when we look back at Adam and Eve, we see that they were equal. And if we're going back to Eden, we need to understand that. I'm just kind of summarising what you're saying. We need to understand that.
When you're going back to the new Eden, we all have to be equal.
So when we go back to New Eden, we all have to be equal.
And then when you trace the line of progression, you see how from the time that Eve sinned, and there was a punishment given to her to be in total submission under her husband.
So when you see from the time that she first sinned, Eve, there was a punishment given to her, and she now has to be on subjection to her husband.
But time goes on. If you trace the line of progression from the time of Abraham.
So with the line of progression, if you trace it from the time of Abraham.
Even Sarah calling Abraham as Lord, because at that time she was in total submission.
And Sarah calling her husband Lord. Yeah.
You look at the time of Noah and you you parallel going up to the time of the modern Israel, you still see, actually before going up to the time of the modern Israel, you see there is that inequality. Men are being put on higher level. Stressing on the side of circumcision, we see that the covenant were mainly particular for men and women were completely ignored.
So you see this inequality and how the covenant was mainly for men and women. Okay, I want to stop you there. You're going through the line of equality, which is good, between men and women, and then you could do slavery as well. But why do we need to see that? So I want you to cut to the question of why. Why is that important for us to see? Okay, you've already said that if we're going back to Eden, we need to know what the first Eden state was and go back to it.
The reason why we need to see that for 30 years we've been saying that we're going to be priests and all men and women are going to be taking the message forward to the world. And if men and women are not equal, then it means women are going to be limited not to take the message.
So one reason is because we've been saying for 30 years that priests are going to take this message forward, and if men and women are not seen as equal, the women are going to be limited in their ability to do that. So it's something about our mindset that needs to change to be prepared to do the job as priests. So we've misunderstood this whole equality issue, and we need to adjust our thinking to be prepared for the work that we need to do. Go on.
And then
So
we
it's,
see that women also have a role to play in the salvation of souls.
so we see women have a part to play in the salvation of souls. Yeah.
And at the end of the world, we shall see that all these people are going to be equal to continue with the work of serving many souls.
So at the end of the world, we see that all these people need to be equal for the work of serving many souls. What about in connection now? Why is equality important in connection with what we've been talking about two streams and the evangelical right and this whole conservative liberal argument? Why do we need this equality message in relation to that?
If you trace the line of the
Slavery?
okay, if you trace the line of the moral majority,
Mhm.
you see how they're coming with a hymn of suppressing the women. Okay, feminism, women are not given a voice.
So we see that the evangelical right are suppressing women, and women are not given a voice, and that they're quite sexist in their attitude. Can we see?
Yeah.
Um,
And based on that, externally, if you look at United States, the time of election where we see Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, and we see the Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, and then Obama.
So we see with the election of Trump, it's connected because we've got Obama and Hillary Clinton, and so there's a race and a gender issue there.
Yeah. And then
Okay.
that's the first time we see a woman standing as a president in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And
So that's the first time we see a woman standing for the presidency in the United States.
we see the United States failed. They didn't recognize the role of women.
Mm-hmm. So they don't recognise the role of women in the United States. So all that's good. I think one of the other things I want to see is that when we look at the line of slavery, it opened up, we saw that the importance of the role of slavery in the 1860 history and how that was a test for the church. That was their type of their Sunday law. And that's all connected with us saying there's no literal Sunday law now. And that the slavery is part of the issues that were facing the church at that time. So we traced the line of slavery and we saw that the Bible endorses slavery on one level, and how in the Civil War, the North and South are using the Bible on both sides to argue. So because we saw that, we know in our time, the same thing's happening. The Christian right are using the Bible to defend things that they think are right and wrong morally, and they're mixing that with politics, and we need to see that because they're saying the way they're using the Bible is similar to the way they're using it in the slavery time period. So we need to understand that progression, those lines of progression, to be able to defend our position. Because if we just have the Bible and we take it, thus saith the Lord, so it's all about how we read a message. If we just have thus saith the Lord, then we can't say that slavery is bad from the Bible if we literally read it like that, because in nowhere it really condemns it. But that's an important point in the way we're going to argue our message forward in our time period, because the evangelical rights are doing the exact same thing as the South in that battle with slavery were doing in using the Bible. So hopefully that's made it clearer why God has given us these parables at this time, and what they're teaching us. And then there's more light to come, I'm sure, on what these are teaching us, and probably more parables to come, more lines of evidence to defend it. But we can see how, hopefully, how solid this is and why it's important. But I want to come, when we come back, I think we're out of time, aren't we? Are we out of time? Yeah. So when we come back, we'll see how we can defend that we're doing all this, because a lot of this is negative. We see the work of Satan, basically. And we'll just give a bit of Spirit Prophecy Bible support as to why God's giving us more information about our enemy in our time period. Okay, let's close. Heavenly Father, we thank you for these parables, these lines of truth and history that you have given us, and more importantly, the understanding that you've given us of these lines and how to parallel them to our time to see what's going on and to understand better the information war that we're in. We pray that your Holy Spirit would continue to guide each one of us to navigate us through this history, that we might pass it successfully, that we might stand upon the evidence you have given us, and that we might be sealed, ready for eternity. We pray that we will settle into the truth so we cannot be moved. I ask that you are a blessing upon my brothers and sisters here, that you would strengthen each one of them, whatever personal trials they are having, that they would be able to put them aside to focus on your word in the time that we have left, that you would strengthen each one of them to go forth and be teachers for you, that we would be faithful priests to the work that you're calling us to do at this time. Thank you for spiritual food that you're giving us, and we pray now for the physical food we're going to eat, that it would give us strength and health, and that we would eat with joy and thanksgiving. We pray that you would bless us for the rest of the day, especially as we prepare for Sabbath as well, and for the upcoming camp meeting. Help our hearts to be in order and to be united with you. We pray and ask in Jesus' name. Amen.